Alright, this is gonna be like a really chatty video. I do have notes to help guide me, but this is just something I've been rambling talking about with friends lately, and I'm just like, I should make a video about it because I have a lot of thoughts. And this is young adult and adult fantasy and sci-fi. And I'm saying and, I'm not saying versus. This is not a versus video. This is not a pros and cons of each video. This is not pitting one against the other because I don't do that. I do prefer adult, but not because young adult is lesser. That's not why. And I think this was triggered by Michael Knipp posting his review of Red Rising, and he talks about how Red Rising to him is a young adult book. And I thought that's fascinating because he just found it off BookTube. I saw it in a bookstore. So in my head, it was always adult because it was always put in the adult section of the bookstore. And I was also talking to Brittany from Books with Brittany about this topic and how we all have our own definitions of it, regardless of the actual definition and how marketing and publishing puts books on shelves. I think when you have been a reader for long enough, you start to form your own molds for certain categories. Doesn't mean things can't break the mold. That doesn't mean the mold is law, but you know what I'm saying? And I kind of wanted to talk about my mold for young adult, what I think about things that are outside of that expectation realm, things that I don't like about the young adult fantasy conversation. And I don't know if there's a general takeaway, but I would have loved to have this conversation in the comments with you guys. Respectfully, of course, and I figured this is the perfect time. There's a bunch of you I love talking to. I'm not big enough that people who scare me will come into the comment section. So it seems like this is a good place to do it because I just find it kind of fascinating because at its core, to me, the young adult versus adult labeling is who is the target audience of this book. Someone writes a book and they say, this is meant to be for 12 to 18-year-olds. That's a young adult book. That's where it gets published. That's the definition, right? And I think that label is useful in terms of knowing the target audience, but I think it's useful for more than that. Like I said, because young adult has acquired a mold, and it's an ever-changing mold. Like a young adult from 2005 is a very different young adult book from 2015, which is a very different young adult book than 2021. Things are ever evolving, but I do think that young adult does have a more restrictive mold than adult when it comes to how people define them. I almost feel like the definition for me of an adult work is that it didn't fit into that box and that wasn't the target audience. It's a combination of those two things because there are definitely books that are published in young adult that maybe aren't at the spirit of the target audience as 12 to 18. Maybe, honestly, the publisher's like, well, we want to get those 22-year-olds who used to read City of Bones, kind of something like that, but it has a lot of the other stereotypical trappings of a young adult book. And I just wanted to list off what I think about. This doesn't mean it's right. This is not law. This is honestly a very personal, subjective approach. And again, I want to say this, having a more restrictive boundary or mold doesn't make the book lesser. And there are plenty of books that I love that break out of it, but I do think it's a really useful thing to recognize, at least for me, like when I pick up a young adult book and I have this expectation or knowledge that it will have these things, I'm going to have a better experience because of my personal reading taste, which is normally, I don't want to say the word unique because young adult is also still has a lot of unique things going on, but I want a more unexpected, unpredictable experience, very creative, which that can happen in the young adult space, but is not happening as often because it has this molding around it. How many times can I say mold in this video before it becomes the fungus in my mind? We shall see. But in general, a young adult book will typically have a young adult protagonist. I actually do not know off the top of my head a young adult book that does not have a character from the age of like 13 to 18. Like, I don't. They normally have a teenage protagonist. That makes sense. The target audience is that. I personally do love to read stories that I can relate to, and normally age is a relator. You're going through similar things in life when you are the same age as a character in a book. That makes sense. Young adults also usually written very close, very interpersonal. Like it's usually first person point of view or like very close third person. You are in that character's head. You are feeling what they're feeling. You are seeing how they're reacting in the moment because the idea, I think, is that a young adult person is very in the moment in their own life. There isn't a lot to reflect on yet because you haven't lived a life to reflect on. I don't know if that's a true thesis. I don't know if I believe in that sentence myself. I do believe teenagers can be reflective, and that's probably why they also still read in the adult genre, because they can find that more there, because on average, when someone's writing that book or when a publisher's looking for that book to put out there, it usually has that very closeness in perspective. Another thing is that typically, not always, young adult has a more direct writing style, it's more fast-paced. These are things I'm expecting. I have read very lyrical YA, I read very slow-paced YA, but that's not the standard, I guess is what I would say. It's normally very gripping. Even if it is a slow-paced book, you are usually turning the pages. It's typically a page turner for specifically fantasy and sci-fi. I don't actually read a lot of contemporary or historical fiction. Those might actually be more slow-paced, so I just want to put that caveat in here that this is my definition for fantasy and science fiction. Probably should have said that earlier, but here we are. And I also, these last two are a little harder to describe, but I almost always would expect a romance element in a young adult book. It doesn't have to be the main center, but there is almost always that, mainly because a teenager is normally looking for connections, and I think authors usually grab for that one. I think it is one that I would like to see less of, because I think there are valuable interactions you can have with people that aren't romance-driven in your teenage years, and I do think that's happening more. I would love to see more a sexual representation in my young adult romance books, and that's happening, but it's a little slower. And then this last one is there are certain beats you expect to be hit in a young adult book. And I don't really know how to describe that, but there is, because I don't want to say there's a formula, because I don't think that's the right way to phrase it, and I don't want to say that they're predictable, because that's also not the right word, but there are certain beats of a narrative that I expect to go through in a young adult story. And so yeah, that's my mold, and it's ever changing. And I guess another small thing to add to this mold is sometimes we define a young adult book on its tropes. There are more tropes that we talk about in reference to young adult books than we do with adult books. That doesn't mean adult books don't have tropes. Adult books have tropes all the time. But for some reason, when we talk about young adult books, we are talking about them in terms of their tropes. Oh, this one has the miscommunication trope. This one has the chosen one. We talk about it in reference to that. And that's not how we talk about adult books, which makes me feel like it is a part of that instinctual definition that we expect, like I said, those plot beats, those elements to be in the story. Adult, like I said, it doesn't have as much of a definition to me. Adult to me just doesn't have as much of a definition. It definitely can still be tropey. Gosh, I've read plenty of predictable adult books. For example, you have the whole Monster of the Week adult mystery. That is a tropey part of adult SFF. It is very predictable. It hits certain beats in the narrative, but it's still adult. Part of that is that it doesn't usually have the protagonist of the age range. It's not usually going through those themes that matter to kids. But Harry Dresden, that is a first-person point of view, fast-paced, direct writing style book with very predictable by-the-beat plots for at least the first 4 books, okay? But that's not a young adult series. Harry Dresden is not a young adult. So that's part of it. And part of it's also marketing. I think Harry Dresden finds a larger audience in the adult section of the bookstore because it is shown, statistically, that men, when they buy from fantasy and sci-fi, buy more from the adult section, and women buy more from the young adult section. And actually, more adults buy young adult books than teenagers, which is a different thing altogether, and not something I want to talk about here. And actually, I do know eventually, one day, Michael Knipp, who I mentioned at the top of this video, who I've had a lot of conversations with, might be posting a similar discussion, and if he ever does, I'll put it in the description down below, because he's really good at these chatty videos. This is one of the first ones I'm attempting, and we'll see how it goes. But it was, like I said, it was his video and us talking that really triggered it, and I don't really care as much about it from the marketing standpoint. I'm thinking of it more as me as a reader and how I pick books to pick up and how I think about it, because I also want to know what you guys think in terms of what do you define as a young adult book. And now I kind of want to talk about the issues I have sometimes with this conversation, where it becomes young adult versus adult, when it becomes one being superior to the other, and it's almost always adult is superior to YA. And you know why I know that? It's because when someone doesn't like a book, they say it's just a young adult book. And it's because when someone says, oh, this book feels like young adult and it's someone's favorite, they're like, no, it's not. It's an adult book. And it's calm down. Like, it's not the end of the world if someone says your book feels young adult to them, because that's not, I mean, maybe that person is using it in the bad way that I don't like, but also young adult's not a bad thing. It's its own thing. It's different in the ways that I've been describing, but it's not a bad thing. And I don't know. I think what happens is people aren't defining their issues with a book properly. Like, if someone says, this book should have been a young adult book, maybe you're thinking tropes weren't done well, because you're associating the tropiness of young adult, which tropes can be done good or bad in both age groups. Maybe you're thinking about the tropiness. Maybe you just didn't connect with the themes. Maybe that adult book had a lot of coming of age themes, a lot of first love themes that you associate with the young adult genre, and you weren't connecting to that. Maybe that adult book had more of a close connection. It was like first person point of view. Maybe it had a more direct prose style and you like the lyrical prose. Maybe it had one of those things that are in your mold of a young adult book and you just didn't like it. You know, maybe it had a female teenage character and you just assume that if it's a female teenage character, it has to be young adult. I dislike this one because it comes from the whole one's better than the other. I actually do not care if I pick up a book if it has a female teenage character, which section it's in. If it's a good story, it's a good story. But you know what I mean? Like, people aren't defining what their issues are. They're just lumping it into one group or another. And by that lumping, if it puts it in one group, it's good. And if they put it in another group, it's less good. And I don't like that. And on the flip side, like, people are hesitant to pick up an adult book because it's intimidating or challenging. But we could break this down into, why do you think it is? Like, why are you great in the young adult genre? Like, why is that something you find so much comfort in? And what scares you about adult? Because it's not just like adult is scary. Like, there are lots of very accessible adult science fiction fantasy books. And there are many reasons why any book in young adult or adult can be intimidating. But maybe it's more like you like the direct writing style in young adult. That happens more often than not. Well, let me tell you, I got plenty of fantasy and sci-fi adult writers who are very direct, very accessible writing styles. We've got The Martian, we've got Brandon Sanderson. There are so many, right? What if it's the pacing? You know, you're used to a more active pace, and sometimes adult can get a little meandering, like a lot meandering. Again, The Martian, super fast paced. Like, there are plenty of those things that you like in young adult that exist in adult, which is why I hate the boundary sometimes, just because it prevents people from crossing over, if that makes sense. Like, there's so many people in the adult space that will never read a young adult book because they label it in a negative connotation and not by what it is. And also, there are books that break that mold. So, like, if people don't want to read young adult because it's just for kids, or they don't think they'll thematically connect, or I don't know, they don't think it's their type of story, Each of Us a Desert. That story is nothing like anything I've read in adult or young adult. It is a beautiful post-apocalyptic fantasy with a journey story and this woman discovering her relationship with her religion. It's a young adult story. It has that closeness in narrative. It has the young protagonist. It's published in young adult, which is probably one of the more defining things, but it's very slow paced. It's actually written at times in second person. It's a beautiful book. So many people who would love that book, who like maybe love the Winter Night trilogy, or they love Uprooted or Spinning Silver, but all of those adult books might never get to Each of Us a Desert if they don't explore that space. Same with Dark and Deepest Red. It's very similar, where it's like, this is a very lyrical young adult book, and it's very quiet story, very slow paced. And like I said, there's just so many of these things that are hidden because we get so stuck in certain definitions that we won't explore. And I dislike it for that too. Like, I think there are positives in having these labels because it helps you have expectations. It helps you grab the book that's right for you in the moment, which is what's important, right? Like, you have a finite time to be entertained. So you want to be entertained. So you want to grab the thing that works for you. But when it becomes a problem is when it impedes you from finding the thing that would be perfect for you, if that makes sense. So I don't really know what the thesis of this video is. I like the labels of young adult and adult because it does help me. I also love when people post videos about young adult books that they love when they're typically adult readers, because I do know that those might be the young adult books that work for me, because as a reader, I do like when things go off the beaten path. Like, I enjoy that. But also, I love the videos on YouTube that tell me young adult books that remind them of different young adult books that I love, because sometimes I want that comfort. I recently read a young adult book, which is probably one of the goriest things I've read in a long time. It has super dark scenes, but it was still for sure a young adult book. It had some of my favorite young adult themes and tropes in it. It unfortunately had that kind of standard for me, young adult falling action. Well, it's not standard, but it had a lacking fallen action for me, which was unfortunate because I really wanted to like it. But what I'm saying is that even though I'm not a young adult reader, I really like that genre, and I really like that I know what I'm getting into when I get into that genre. And I think adult's just more of a catch-all. Anything can be published in adult. Like it's harder to define, which is both its strength and its weakness. I will find way more duds in adult than I do in young adult, because in young adult, it's really easy for me to find what I'm looking for at the time. And I think that's a strength. And like I said, although I like this labeling, I think this labeling is useful. I don't like when it makes people pigeonhole themselves into certain categories. I'm just like, you can have a preference. You also probably know yourself as a reader very much, but also it's okay to explore and go to either one, and neither one is good or bad. Neither one's even really that different. They have become different because of marketing and because of who buys from where, so it's the world we live in. But I don't know. This is just the stuff I've been thinking about on this topic for like weeks. So I'd love to continue this conversation in the comments down below if you have anything to add, like your definition of a young adult or adult book. You can expand it to other genres. Like I said, I primarily read science fiction and fantasy, so I don't have much experience in young adult contemporaries or historical fictions and things like that. So it's just not something I felt like I could speak on, if that makes sense. I mean, I think I've read like one contemporary young adult in the past like 10 years, so it's been a minute. And that's it for this one. I don't really have an emoji. You can just say hi or do a smiley face. Also, let me know if you liked this type of video. I don't do chatty videos very often. They kind of scare me, but I really wanted to talk about this, and there are other things I have lots of meandering thoughts on. So if you liked it, let me know, and I'll work on thinking of getting the courage to make other ones. But otherwise, like if you liked it, subscribe if you want to, check out the Discord if you want to chat more, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.